Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, or whenever time this show is airing. I'm State Senator Michael Rodrigues, and welcome to the next edition of Voices from Beacon Hill. And I'm honored, as always, to be joined by whom I consider the best legislative delegation in the State House, my colleagues from the Greater Fall River Legislative Delegation, Representative Paul Schmid, Representative Alan Sylvia, and Representative Carol Fiola. Hello, everyone.
Hello there, Senator.
Hello, Senator. Thank you for your kind words.
And viewers.
Yeah, absolutely. And here we are again. Spring has sprung. The jonquils are up.
Thank God.
Finally.
Thank God.
Finally.
No more shoveling snow.
It's been a killer. You know, having Representative Schmidt come to my house to offer the shovel has been quite an experience. I never
How do you
expected
get
that.
such an honor,
You know,
a
I never
distinction?
expected that.
Because he has to drive by my house to get to your house. So
He's good like that.
Yeah.
He brings the cattle and the plow.
Yeah, well, I drive by your house and I notice nobody's shoveled, so I keep going.
Yeah. It's a big driveway. It's a big driveway. Well, it's a busy time for us up at State House, but I think we wanted to start today just talking a little bit about a real hero from Fall River, someone who has put Fall River on the map internationally through his work with Dollars for Scholars. And of course, I'm talking about Dr. Irving Fradkin. We were at an event earlier today honoring Dr. Fradkin with some folks from California, some folks from Louisiana, and really, it was quite an event. What do you think?
Inspirational, and I got to tell a little Dr. Fradkin story, if I may. I came into the room to greet him, and I leaned down. He was sitting down, and I said, Dr. Fradkin, you must feel very honored that so many people from the community, and not just the community, but there were people from California, Louisiana, all over the United States. I said, you must be honored that so many people are here. And he said, Paul, it's not about me. It's about Fall River and the founding of Scholarship America.
Yeah.
And that's you know, it's a wonderful thing to think. You know, $1 started by Eleanor Roosevelt has grown to over $3 billion, and there's no greater gift than we can give than education. And of course, that is going to be perpetuated, and let's hope that that continues. But it was a great feeling to have all of us, the delegation, to be with Dr. Fradkin as they do that documentary. I thought that was very interesting.
It was, Representative, and I think that what we need to keep remembering is it started here in Fall River.
Started here.
With that $1, as the representative said, from Eleanor Roosevelt, that Dr. Fradkin in fact asked for, turned into this $3 billion national organization, and it's come full circle because Dr. Fradkin's going to be 93. He's just turned 93, and this documentary that the people from New Orleans were here to tape is going to be used by this infamous, very famous documentary writer all around the country and the world to encourage communities to start their own simple Dollars for Scholars so that every child in their community, like ours, can get a college education. So hopefully it will continue, and I think his goal is to reinvigorate this community. And I know the good board members that he has believe that. I know this community believes that. And truly, we say this all the time, the key is education. So we applaud him. We'll give him a big hand and to say thank you, Dr. Fradkin, and your wife, Charlotte, for being by your side for 69 years.
Yep, amazing. 69 years. God bless them both.
Yeah. And I think it's something that Fall River should take great pride in, that Scholarship America was founded right here in the scholarships. Is that where we got our scholarships?
Yes, it was.
Yeah. So it was founded right here in Fall River, and it is the first national organization for women. Women. Education. I have women. I have education on the brain.
Schmid, you have women on the brain.
I know,
What is that? But,
it's Friday.
Wait, it's Friday afternoon while we're taping this, and we have had some busy weeks, and we are a little
But as
punched.
Dr. Fradkin,
Thank you for bailing me out.
as Dr. Fradkin would say, we have a lot of work to do. And you know, it's interesting, and of course I mentioned he's 93, and you know, when I think of Paul Schmidt and Carol, who just turned 28 recently, we have a long way to go. So retirement is out of the question. So we have an awful lot to give to our community. And so all those people who consider retirement, get that out of your head, because when you look at people like Dr. Fradkin, who can offer so much still, he's blind. He was blind. You
Yep.
know, I mean, he's lost his vision now almost completely.
Yes, he couldn't recognize
Any of
anyone.
us.
I mean, people that were standing right in front of them. He had to ask who they were.
He's still
But
calling
he hasn't
us.
lost his wit.
No,
Or he hasn't lost his telephone
Oh,
number.
I was just going to say, his
Calls us all the
telephone
time.
skills. But
So-
you know,
I don't think there's
Senator,
anyone I've met with more in my 18 years of service than Dr. Fradkin at Newport Creamery, at the ATMC,
At his living room
in
and-
his living room, you know, at the Trade Winds restaurant, and but it's never about him. It's always about the children. It's always about students. It's always about education.
Absolutely.
Because he really
Important issues.
believes, you know, that with an education you can achieve anything, and we are all responsible to trying to provide the best education possible for the children in our community.
is that a good segue, Senator, to talk a little, just briefly update the viewers about the Chapter 70 that we, you know, the early,
Sure,
the resolution, the Senate and the
Well,
House came
it's
to?
April, so it must be budget time. You know, one of the challenges always, as we're developing a budget at the State House for the state budget, is that our fiscal year runs concurrent with local municipalities' fiscal year from July 1st to June 30th. In municipalities, be them Fall River or any of the surrounding communities, are so reliant upon state aid that it's important for them to have a firm number as they're preparing their budget so they can use in their preparation. And, you know, both the House and Senate passed a local aid resolution, if somebody wants to expound and give the information of what was contained in that resolution.
Well, I would just like to make the point that we passed this resolution on March 14, and this early appropriation really helps the municipalities. And Senator, both you and I cut our teeth on the Westport Finance Committee.
That's right.
And we used to wrestle with not knowing what we were going to get from the state until June.
And communities still make the mistake, as much warning as we gave them, don't rely on the governor's budget.
Right.
You know, House One, so-called governor's budget, has his vision, if you will, about how the budget should be written. But it doesn't matter who the governor is. Democrat or Republican, Deval Patrick or Mitt Romney or Paul Cellucci or Bill Weld. It's a political statement. It's not a practicable document. When we prepare our budget, we have a constitutional mandate that it be balanced. The governor can propose anything, because not only does he propose in his budget how to spend all of these billions of dollars, he could also propose in his budget how to raise, like last year, $1.9 billion in new taxes that the legislature was not going to go along with.
Remember that? That was crazy. That
So-
certainly wasn't going to get
But
through.
thankfully, there's an agreed upon Chapter 70 amount and agreed upon free cash amount. It's called free cash.
Unrestricted government aid.
unrestricted government aid to the cities. Fall River, that's important because there is an increase. And it's agreed upon, the Senate and the House have both agreed upon.
And does
some
anybody
figures.
remember the numbers?
I know for education, I'm the new
Yep,
kid, so I
yep.
should be a little up to speed, over $102 million
Yep.
for our Chapter 70 funds,
Yep.
which was $2 million
More.
Yeah, like
more,
2.6 million,
2.6.
yep.
Yeah, I was going to say 2.5, but $2.6 million more than last year. And so again, people wonder, you know, how do we fund education? And every community has a different number that they get from the state, and it is a very complicated formula. But please know this, two things. We got $2.6 million more for Chapter 70 funding this year over last year, which is over $102 million. And if you take all 351 cities and towns, we're approximately, and I didn't even bring my notes, we're approximately the 7th highest funded
the Commonwealth.
city or town, 7th or 8th in the entire Commonwealth. That's a lot of funding.
It's the highest per capita funding.
capita.
City of Fall River and the City of Lawrence received the highest per capita funding in the Commonwealth. And keep this in mind, as you said, about $102+ million in Chapter 70 funding that the school committee now is debating appropriating $96 million for the school budget. So the Commonwealth of Massachusetts pays 100% of the operating costs of the City of Fall River schools, plus another $6 or $7 million in indirect expenses.
And that's what I don't think, Senator, the taxpayers understand. It's not costing the taxpayer out of pocket a penny to educate a student in Fall River.
Well, their taxes through the
taxes
state,
through the
but-
state, but it's not costing them in their local tax.
Right.
There's no increase there to support education.
Right.
So when other communities, they're paying a lot more to educate students.
Now, interestingly, just this week, and just to finish up on education or whatever we want to talk about, but there'd been a discussion on this formula that we are so generously funded from, this Chapter 70 formula that has been in place for quite some time that truly favors a Fall River. Do we ever have enough money for education? No. That's another story. Absolutely not. We need so much, but the state is putting in that big lion's share, if not 100% plus. But they're talking about opening up that formula to reevaluate whether Chapter 70 formula is the right formula. And it's been interesting because as every issue, we hear the pros and cons from all different groups. What we're hearing is if that funding formula gets opened up, be prepared, Fall River.
That would numbers would
You
change.
you will be attacked by the other 345 other communities, roughly, that are not getting as much per capita as you are. And so we are fearful of that, although certainly statewide, a lot of the communities want to see that happen. So we've had some discussion locally here with people and there that have felt that's a good thing to do, and we've been hearing from people in the state that is a dangerous potential, that's all.
It was interesting that the teachers union came to us and we had conversation with them. They pressured us. I happened to be at a meeting with Representative Viola. They pressured us on this very issue. And it was
said,
we were getting pressure from people outside of Fall River, more so, people from Somerset and other communities, to look at this.
It's an
formula.
extremely complicated formula. And Rep. Schmidt and I, when we served on the Finance Committee, we had a colleague, John Miller, who really was a rocket scientist. He was a retired engineer from NASA, and he from Houston, so he was a rocket scientist. So
He tried to figure it out.
he did figure it out, and he told me it's extremely complicated, but I could not think of a better way to measure something that's almost impossible to really measure, and that is a community's ability to support education, the wealth of a community. There are like 32 matrices, and he spent a lot of time on it, and he said it's about as good as you're going to get. And what's important to note is that this formula has to satisfy the Massachusetts Supreme Court, because Chapter 70 of the Education Reform Act was the result of a lawsuit filed many years ago by, I believe, someone from Hancock, Massachusetts, that claimed that Massachusetts students were not receiving their constitutionally guaranteed right of fair and appropriate education, that the quality of one's education was determined by their zip code, that if you lived in a zip code for a community like Weston or Brookline or Newton, where they had more wealth, more ability to pay more for the education, you were getting different quality of education than if you lived in, and the Supreme Court said that is true, excuse me, and that forced the Commonwealth to come up with this. And
we can still make that
my
argument,
predecessor
though.
in the House, former State Representative and Mayor Ed Lambert, was instrumental in writing that Chapter 70 legislation
That was back in
Representative
94.
Haddad as
wasn't it?
well.
92, 93 it was passed.
92.
And the formula was changed once.
Rep. Haddad was involved
Rep.
with that,
Haddad
very much
was
so.
the House Chair of the Education Committee, and she was quite involved. Extremely complicated and controversial. I really don't think you'll see us addressing it again.
No, but if you just look at the dollar cost per student versus the dollar per student spent in Wellesley per student, I think it's, I could be wrong, maybe
9 versus 14 or
9
10
in Fall
versus
River
14.
versus, or 10 versus 14 in Wellesley and Newton.
That's about the right
There's a
numbers.
big disparity.
Sure.
Well, there still is a disparity,
Yes.
and it still is it's a judgment
On
and
the
a
city or
value
town.
from the city or town. We require every community to make a minimum local contribution. and then we make up the difference with state dollars. If a community chooses that they want to appropriate above the minimum, there's nothing stopping them.
Right.
No,
From doing that.
and the Weston Brooklyns and Newtons of this
do.
world,
They choose to.
they very high taxes. I think the average tax bill in those communities is something like $15,000
Yes.
per home.
Right.
So, and so that's where the money for education comes from. Very high taxes.
You know, I just read this past Sunday in the Globe, they had the top 25 school systems in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and it's all these names: Lexington, Dover,
Sherborne.
class size, one teacher for every 13 students, small class size.
When you hear the class size and you hear the dollar per student, you see that there's a difference.
Right.
You know, and we talked about this. It's just like saying, you know, someone said the other day, Alan, when you grew up, you were poor. Well, I didn't know I was poor because everybody in the neighborhood was poor. So
we were all poor,
We were
yeah.
poor.
Yeah.
But if you go to a school and the class size is 31, well, every class size in that community is 31, so you think that that's okay. But there's a big difference between 18 and 19 and 31.
Right.
Class size is identified. Class size, early education, two key components: K through 2, K through 3. You know, get that foundation and class size. And I know that our superintendent, our mayor, our school committee, our city council, everybody's struggling with that and trying to make it the best possible. Our teachers are working so hard. We know our parents want the best for their children. We know when they show up to school and their attendance is good and they're in school every day, they're learning great things. And so we just wanted to touch on, you know, our share of putting in that chunk of money. Your money ultimately comes back here to Fall River, and obviously we need to continue to work together to do more.
Well, and thank you, Representative Fiola, for bringing up the subject of early education. And I know we've talked about that before, but I just want to say again that it's just been proven over and over that if you get kids started out reading in K or even better in pre-K, they're fine.
That's
But
right.
if they're not reading then and they're struggling in the 3rd grade, then they fall behind. And so I know that all of us are
supported
making
that issue.
early education an important
And the extended
priority
day. The
for
extended
us.
school day has been a big thing in Fall River. And now we're looking at Morton possibly as being an extended school partner. But it's worked in this community. You know, I made this statement, in Fall River in particular, I like to see the kids all be in extended day. They're safer in school than they are at home.
Right.
And, you know,
Keep in mind those numbers for extended day, and I just don't think the listeners know this the way we do, and the way I've learned is that extended day funding, whether it's for the Cuss, I believe the Talbot and the Sylvia,
Yep.
and we're looking to add more so that
Foster and,
Morton
and
possibly,
Morton.
and that's up to the superintendent to decide where.
Yeah.
But that money, let's just say it's about $800,000. That's on top of, that's
Chapter 70.
additional funding than the Chapter 70. So we're coming into Fall River, we're bringing back to Fall River
Much more.
more. And not every community, there's only, I'm going to say approximately a dozen communities roughly. And again, I saw the list, not many. And we keep getting that extra funding because we're showing results.
And we have to keep doing that. And we do that, ladies and gentlemen, by working together. And that's one of the things that we've been doing well. And I thank Senator Rodrick for that, because in the House, we are working together to make sure Fall River gets what it should be getting, and it's been working. Thankfully so, and it's been coming our way. And above and beyond what we've been getting, it's been wonderful. So-
And keeping on the theme of education, a piece of legislation that's working its way through the process right now that we'll be debating soon, if we hadn't already debated it by the time this show airs, is the expansion of charter schools. We have, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts has a cap for each community on the number of students that can attend charter schools. We lifted the cap once, maybe about 5 or 6 years ago. There's a big debate going on now on not whether or not to lift the cap, but parameters around lifting the cap, especially for those lower performing schools. And how do you measure performance? Do you measure it just strictly on MCAS scores, or do you measure it on gains of annual yearly performance, AYP gain? So that's the debate, and We in Fall River just had 2 new charter schools approved. One being the expansion of Atlantis Charter School, that they're going to establish a new high school with some new slots for their K through 8 program. Atlanta's been operating for over 20 years in Fall River, extremely successful, a level 1 school, the highest MCAS rates of any school in the city, and the establishment of a new charter school, the Argosy Charter School, that's got it using a different model, but that's used up all the seats under the cap.
Yes, and by the way, if I can just jump in on that, Senator, you know, one of the purposes of charter schools was to try out new concepts in education, so that all schools might learn from what was being done. And unfortunately, many charter schools have not worked well with the district schools. But Atlantis Charter received special commendation, and that was one of the chief reasons that their charter got extended, got broadened, that they have done a wonderful job working with Superintendent Mayo Brown, collaborating,
school
which is the way
choice-
it's supposed to be.
School choice is always important. I've always said throughout my career, I support charter schools, I support law schools, I support preschools, I support Catholic schools, I support
I agree with
all
you,
schools.
Senator.
It's that blend. It's that blend that works so well in Fall River.
Because one size does not fit all when it comes to education. And we in Massachusetts have recognized the fact that as these students leave our public schools to go into the charter public schools, they take the Chapter 70 dollars with them because those dollars follow the student. So we have the most aggressive charter school reimbursement dollars in the country that we, you know, for every student that leaves the Fall River Public Schools to go to a Fall River charter public school, for the first year, 100% of those dollars stay
That's right,
stay
in the public school.
Yeah.
And then a
and then
percentage.
for the next 4 years afterwards, they get 25%. So they actually get reimbursed 225% of every student that's sent to.
It's really
Listen,
to
and
charter
you know
schools.
what? And everyone has an opinion, but you know, the bottom line becomes what's working for our students. We need to continue to improve education for all the reasons we all know, socioeconomic, the struggles and strifes today, children who may not have had the opportunity for early preschool and that reading, many reasons. So where we can offer in a community like Fall River, an urban community, school choice in a public setting, the children win.
Yeah.
Right.
The families win. As you know, it hasn't been easy, and you've seen that whole shift because we've been successful, as Rep. Schmidt said, and Senator Reps, we've been successful in Fall River with the charter schools. We've been more successful in our public schools, in the regular district schools. So something's working,
And you
and
know,
we've got to keep it going.
Representative Faiolo, you were at, and so wasn't Senator Rodrick. We just had the Catholic schools visit up at the State House. And you know, we had a large group of
We sure
Holy
did.
Trinity and St. Stan's.
Holy Name.
Holy Name was there, and you know, they too play a very important role in our community. And when you look at, you know, and I keep thinking of a meeting we had many months ago with Meg Mayo Brown about how inclusive she was when you mentioned charter schools, how inclusive she was with that partnership.
Yeah.
And now you think of why it works so well. But Fall River has a lot of stressors that other communities don't have.
So that's why we need that
And
choice.
those stressors are some of those things that are really that are elevating a public education, and it's working here, thankfully so, because extending that day, you know, we have 80% of our students on subsidized lunch. We have a poverty issue.
Yeah.
We have an overabundance of numbers of people who
Drug
are
and
in poverty,
alcohol.
who are being sent from other communities to public housing, which is another issue that we could spend 8 hours on a show with. We have serious substance abuse issues, okay? You know, we've been dealing with that. Again, we could spend 2 hours on that. But all of this is a reflection, who's being hurt by this is our children.
But in spite of that, we have excellent options and opportunities and
Thankfully
choices
so.
for our families, and we're going to continue to put our support, as you've done all along throughout
Well,
your whole career, Senator.
Let's just jump off education for a second.
We never meant
because,
to stay on
Yeah,
education.
but, well, it's an
People
important
should
topic.
know. I know.
What's more important?
Yeah, it is an
No,
important
that-
topic.
we
and I
started
don't
with
mean
Dr. Frampton.
That something
This is
is
important.
that something
Yep.
is more
Throwing out.
important. But as we're talking about budget, there are,
Understood.
besides Chapter 70 funding, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts does provide other support for our communities. Most notably, something that's called, we call it now UGA, Unrestricted
UGA.
Government Aid. The old days it was lottery aid, but in the old days, 100% of the lottery revenues were dedicated to cities and towns. As the demand for government aid, local aid, increased beyond what just the lottery can provide, we in the legislature, all of us and all of our colleagues, dipped into our general funds to supplement the lottery aid. So it's more than just lottery aid now. It's lottery aid plus, what we can afford. And the city of Fall River is going to receive an extra close to $600,000.
21 million.
21 million.
Yeah, $21 million.
$22 million.
And that
A lot
money,
of money.
what happens to that money? That goes,
Unrestricted.
it's
used by the
unrestricted.
city.
It's used.
And, and you know, it's something very funny. We were having a conversation with some leadership up in Boston, and we were begging, as we usually do, for more money. And you know what they said to us? Oh, when you go, you're getting $21 million. See who thanks you for that money. See if one person thanks you. If we gave you $200 million, it wouldn't matter. Isn't it funny? Nobody said anything. We came back with more money. We're getting $21 million free cash to be used by the municipality, Fall River. And
But it's very educational, because
It is.
you look at that chapter 70 of 102 million plus, 21 plus, almost $22 million right off the bat coming in. And that's before the property tax to the city that people are paying, their
a lot of
property
money.
taxes, the real estate property taxes and others, and water bills and so forth. So
and we're still going to get more.
that's coming, and there's more money to come. We're just beginning, as the senator said, our budget season. But I think it's just helpful for you all to know where the money comes from.
Yeah, those are the two primary.
That's the big money.
And that's where the big money is. And and that unrestricted government aid was about a 2.5%, nearly 3% increase over this year. But there are other funds too that we will be advocating, that we will be arguing for.
Good thing we
Rep.
better.
Fiola mentioned one earlier, the expanded learning time grants. We have
that's
the
important.
Massachusetts Math and Science Initiative, which has proven to be
The AP.
an incredible program at Durfee. Prior to this program being implemented, which are dollars to pay for Saturday programs, pay for teachers and instructors, I believe, and I hate to mention that without having it in front of me, but I believe we had like 29 students that scored a 3, 4, or 5 on an advanced placement
And this
test.
is a quick turnaround since that program went into.
And in
it was-
4 years,
yes, quick.
we have over 200 students now scoring 3, 4, and 5 in the advanced placement
One of
test.
the most successful programs in the Commonwealth.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So if you give
Lot to be proud of.
listen, this is a Fall River program. You give the Fall River people what they need, they always rise to the top. That's we're Fall River people. You
think so.
rise to the top.
Yep. And who's up there arguing for more money for Fall River?
All of us.
It's a good thing.
We,
All of us.
raise
We're
your
doing a lot
hand.
of
The
Right.
team, the team, the
yeah.
team.
Sure.
Well, it's hard to believe, but this 30
No,
minutes
sir.
has gone. Yes,
We
we're
didn't
down.
talk. Next month, we're gonna promise you this. We're gonna talk a little bit, because this is something everyone likes to ask us about.
Yes.
First of all, we know with the construction going on, Mass DOT.
Right.
Everybody's been hearing a lot about them.
Okay.
But the great work that they do, and their lawn cutting and maintenance that we'll talk about. How's that, Senator?
Well, so
I can't
DOT,
believe it.
Put them on.
DOT
I
will
can't
be
believe
the
it. That's
top
all we
of
talked about. See, folks, we never plan what we're going to say. We just do it. And today was all about education. We never once said we were going to talk about education.
Four of the things
I
on
can't
my
believe that.
list.
We
Well, what
did
a
that.
better place than here at Bristol Community College. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Steve, and
Steve
your
Kamara.
team, and for
And all the
hosting
folks
this.
Thanks,
there
everybody.
who run the
Thank you.
controls.
Get outside and get some fresh air. Enjoy this spring weather.
Happy spring, everybody.